Okay, so we just talked about the very basic principles of convection. Now we're going to talk about how this applies to the Earth's climate. And convection is actually super important for how there are many different kinds of regional differences in climate and weather. So here's a little diagram here of how the sun heats up the Earth. And so I put up here all the three different kinds of how heat is transferred or moved around. We have radiation starting off, and remember that radiation is a kind of heat transfer when heat from the sun can heat up the Earth through space, and it's basically transferred via light. So anyway, we have radiation coming from the sun that heats up the planet Earth, and as the Earth is heated up, and we kind of learned this with the greenhouse effect, is as the Earth is heating up, it also releases heat into the air. And when we have heat from the Earth being released right into the layer of air that's touching the Earth, this is actually called conduction. So we're going to have a transfer of heat from the Earth to that very closest layer of air on the stuff. So that really heats up the lowest layer of air there. So, and as this air heats, this is when we get into convection. So the air heats, it gets hot air is going to rise. So I showed you here this cycle here. So the hot air is going to rise, and then once it gets to a certain point in the atmosphere, away from the Earth that's hot, it's going to start to cool off that air. And as the air cools off, it's going to start to sink. So this is what we call a convection cell, aka cycle or pattern. And so the hot air rises, and then it cools off somewhere in the atmosphere, and as it cools off, it sinks. So it's this really the sinking of air that drives this pattern or this cell around and around. And it's this same kind of pattern or cell that's going to drive many of the different kinds of climate that we see all around the world, and also is going to make differences in those climate systems. So why is one place having monsoons all the time, while another place might be having drought or might be a desert, or all these kind of things. So the next thing we're going to get into is a IRL example of this kind of convection cell. But just remember, coming back to these same principles, that even though we're going to talk about an example of a cell, the same basic convection principle is gonna be in place.